Well, hello everyone. Welcome on to our September webinar episode of Women Leaders in Customer Success on behalf of myself, Minna, and Practical CSM. So I am excited to be bringing you this series of great women CS leaders. And as you know, every month we have a new guest speaker, and together we'll pick up various hot topics related to CS and some others as well, as you'll hear today. So today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Abby Hammer as my guest, and we'll be talking about customer success plus product equals success best friends, our BFFs. So as you notice that this is probably our first bit outside the CS remit topic. So I'm really excited to get into this topic with Abby. So welcome, Abby. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Perfect. Okay. So first of all, obviously, Abby, you probably know introductions. Most of you will know as the great leader at Churn Zero, but could you just give us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you get here today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Abby Hammer, and I'm the Chief Product Officer at Churn Zero. For those of you that may not be familiar with Churn Zero, we are the #1 most loved customer success platform, and we're dedicated to helping subscription businesses succeed at scale. So our platform is really designed to give customer success teams the proactive edge that they need to stay ahead, whether that's getting in front of changing customer health or proactively managing renewals, mitigating risk, expanding opportunities. We really want to help customer success teams focus their time so they can have the biggest impact with their customers. And I've been here at Churn Zero since the very beginning. Gosh, I should know the years off the top of my head, but I don't. But I was in employee #1. And in addition to leading our product teams, I was also our first chief customer officer up until about a year ago when we brought on our current CCO, Ali Tiscornia, who's wonderful. So while I am on the product side of the house, I will openly admit I am a certified CS geek. I think about customer success all the time, both from the practical side of designing and executing CS programs that are effective for customers, but then also on the strategic side of developing a platform that's designed to really enhance and expand the efforts of CS teams. So for me, Churn Zero is really a lovely combination of the two halves of my career coming together. I started my career in customer success and in implementations. So that is sort of my home base, if you will. And like a lot of people that work in that space, I eventually became interested in how the sausage is made, I guess. And I got interested in the product side of the house and was given an opportunity to shift into that. So spent many years working exclusively in product, but really got pulled back into the fascinating world of customer success at my last organization, where we had a real churn problem. We didn't understand it. We couldn't predict it. We didn't know how to get our hands around it and how to equip our teams to combat it. And so I was part of a working group that really tried to understand that problem, quantify it, predict it. And so the first versions of Churn Zero really sparked from that real problem, from feeling that real pain. And I find the problem of, helping customers in the most effective and efficient ways possible really endlessly fascinating. It's a multi-headed monster that changes all the time. So I get to really think about that and exercise on that a lot here at Churn Zero.
That's awesome. I know that Churn Zero also brought out the kind of the first customized CS AI tool as well.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes. We've spent a lot of this year really thinking about how you can't talk about technology in 2023 and not talk about AI, but really thinking about how some of the new technology that's coming out can benefit customer success teams and make them a lot more efficient. We still spend a lot of time as customer success teams doing low value but still necessary work. And that's where technology advancements can really come in and give us more and more time to be strategic, be consultative, be the things that are much harder for technology to replicate and humans are particularly great at.
Yeah, if you haven't tried it, go check it out. I think it's really great. But talking about a little bit further about topic, because I think it's really related to what you've done. We've done the customer success, now you've done products. You're kind of the best friend of both of those worlds. So when we talked initially and we picked this topic, can you just tell us a little bit more of why it's so close to your heart in terms of marrying these two functions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the fact is that most interactions your customers are going to have with your company occur within your product. There's lots of other ways that you communicate with your customers. Email, social meetings, events, all these sorts of things. But even when you combine all those things, they likely don't outnumber the interactions that are happening in your product. So day to day, the most consistent, meaningful interactions are happening within your application. Every login, every screen, every click is an opportunity for a negative, neutral, or positive experience. Now, when I say that, that sounds a lot like this is a product alone is responsible for success of customers. But the fact of the matter is that in my experience, very few products can stand alone, either because of the complexity and capability of that product, but more specifically and more importantly, because of what we want as consumers of products. We want and expect support and human guidance along the way, and that's all customer success. And so in my experience, it's this combination, the quality solution and the quality support around that solution that customers renew on. They don't renew on one versus the other. This is two sides of the same coin. So product and CS are really tied together by this same goal. They're both trying to bring realized value to customers that's going to result in a lasting relationship, and they can't do it without the other. So the topic's super close to my heart because I've been on both sides of this relationship, and I've been on both sides of this relationship when it was going really well and when it had some areas that it could improve. So I know what it looks like when CS and product have a really productive relationship. I've seen the impact that that can have on customers, on an organization, on a team's morale, on business metrics, when CS and product are really, aligned and allied in what they're doing. And to me, that's the real magic of SaaS. When you have super happy customers that are successful and your team believes in the solution. And that's really only possible when these teams work together because they represent the entirety of what your customers are going to renew on. And I will say, if everything I'm saying here freaks you out because you're like, well, I don't have a relationship with product, like, what do I do? You and I are going to talk about that a little bit today. But I also want to make sure that people know you're not alone. Sometimes we're not sure if challenges we have within our organization are unique to just our organization. TSIA did a really interesting collaboration study between product and CS last year, and they came out with a maturity matrix that I really like, sort of representing the levels of maturity that you can have between these two parts of your organization. And there were 4 levels. And when they surveyed respondents, about 80% of people said they were on one of the lower 2 levels. So a lot of people have a lot of room to grow in this relationship is my point. So if you don't feel like you're there yet, hopefully today I can give some good pointers and some good places to start, but you are not alone. It's a hard relationship to get right.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a great segue to let's talk about that partnership. So real basics, right? How did you or would you suggest people to start building that partnership between product and CS, and how do you go about when it's at the maturity level 1 or 2 so far? So what's your golden nuggets?
Yeah, this might sound strange, but I think the key to starting to have a good relationship is acknowledging what I think of as a little bit of the elephant in the room. And that's that there's a lot of, I'm going to use the word natural friction that can result between CS and product because the way they approach day to day and the way they approach challenges is pretty different. Let's think about in our mind when we say, I'm going to describe the best product manager. We're going to describe them as data-driven, as analytical, as technical. Maybe we describe them, hopefully, I should say we describe them as customer-centric, but we mean that in the sense that they're doing the best thing possible for as many customers as possible.
Right.
When we think about the best CSMs, we're going to describe things like they're relationship focused, they possess a really high EQ, they're consultative. And we're also going to describe them as customer centric, but in the sense that they take every single thing that happens to each and every one of their customers really seriously. So it's customer centricity on both sides, but it enacts itself in really different ways. And that is something you need to acknowledge head on, because that's going to change how these teams approach their day-to-day work, how they solve problems, what they focus on and care about. And there can be natural tension on how you approach customer centricity if you don't really understand your counterpoints. So I think that's where this all begins from, is having an appreciation for the opposite team and a deep understanding of the opposite team. In my opinion, I think that has to start with leadership.
Right.
If you are in a position of leadership or influence, you have to remember that what matters to you is going to matter to other people. You are setting standards. And so if you are in a leadership position in CS, or if we happen to have other product people on the line here today, you really have an opportunity to say, hey, we need to care about each other's goals and objectives. And in fact, we need to have a lot of the same goals and objectives. A shared language is a huge way to start a successful relationship. And by shared language, I mean shared objectives, shared data, shared metrics. If from the very beginning you're defining the problems differently and you're quantifying them differently and you're measuring success differently, that's two roads divided that are very difficult to merge back together in any sort of practical way. So you really need to anchor yourselves in shared understandings of the customer and a shared appreciation of how you both participate in bringing about success for customers, and how, even though there's natural tension points potentially between your two teams, that tension doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of care or a lack of good intent or a lack of shared, a goal achievement. It just means that that's a natural part of solving the same problem in different ways.
I think that's a really interesting take on, where does the view become, the difference between those two views and why people drive different agendas, because they're looking at it from a different sides of coin. So really, really great insight there. You mentioned a little bit in terms of that customer centricity. Now, obviously, one of the things typical organizations do is to have a voice of customer programs and so forth. In your view, what is kind of the best practices for companies to run this program or leverage its data that you get out of it? How do you quantify or measure any of that?
Yeah, so a voice of the customer program is a really important part of endearing yourself to your customers. I think we always think about, hey, what's in it for us? Like we're me like, oh, let's get those insights. Let's drive our roadmap on it. Let's set CS programs on it, which is all important. I'm not trying to diminish those things, but I also think we need to think about why would we do this for our customers? We do it because as humans, when we invest in something, when we see ourselves in it, we're more likely to be loyal. And that's very true of vendor customer relationships. Customers really want to see that their ideas and their experiences matter. I think it was SurveyMonkey that did a survey a couple of years ago that revealed that 91% of customers think that companies should be fueling innovation based on listening to their buyers and their customers. Not going out and hiring a team of experts who should know the most about it and should be most primed to fuel innovation. People believe that their vendors should be listening to them. And so a strong VOC program can be a key strategy for improving customer retention if it's done right. If it's done poorly, it can be a key reason that people leave because you're just exacerbating a problem of not feeling heard or not feeling the product has you in mind. But it can be a really key way to improve customer satisfaction and improve customer retention. Speaking as a product person, before you even get to how do we collect feedback, how do we quantify it, how do we use it to understand where we're going to go, I think a lot of this comes down to roadmap, which might sound a little weird, but hear me out here for a second. In my experience, a lot of when customers say, I don't feel heard, or I don't believe the product is changing with me in mind, that is often a reflection more of them simply not having any understanding of the vision and direction. And your product team should take ownership of that. I spend a lot of time here at Churn Zero and would encourage others to do the same, where we educate our CX team on roadmaps in general, but even more important, we make them ambassadors of our roadmap. I don't want to be the only person who can talk about the vision for Churn Zero and where we're going. That's not scalable, one. But two, I want to make sure that when my CSMs are in calls with customers and a customer is expressing a lack of clarity around where we're going as a solution, that my CSMs can be clear about what matters to us, what we're trying to achieve for them as customers, what we're trying to achieve as a business. And that only comes if you invest in educating on roadmap and really equipping your CX team to have effective conversations around roadmap. That alone just closes so much of the gap of customers feeling heard, and also closes the gap of, if they gave feedback, potentially seeing it come round and start to come to life. So I would say there's a requirement on your product team, and I will say this to any product manager out there: you should take responsibility for making sure that you're collecting, that you're really informing your CX team around your own roadmap.
Yeah.
Then there's lots of stuff we can talk about feedback, but I'll pause there because I do think that's an important point to sort of take a beat on, because we all so quickly go to like, how do we decide what's going to go into roadmap? It's like, can we even effectively talk about roadmap is often the first hurdle.
Right. And what are you doing in terms of educating people on what is the actual product does now and why should it do something else, right?
Exactly.
Just to recap, that 91% think that they should be being heard, and your roadmap should form from them. So rather than doing Apple as in I can do, you will buy what I sell you, right? You kind
exactly.
of looking at from customer point of view. So that's really interesting. So actually on that topic, how would you quantify the feedback that's coming into your organization, and how do you as a product person think about that in the roadmap itself?
Yeah. So knowing that I'm speaking to a lot of CS folks today, what I will say is that I think, given the nature of CX work, in my experience, CS often naturally leads with anecdotes. We lead with stories because we have these very intense experiences, positive or negative, with customers, and so the story often to us really represents, like what we need from the product. And I can talk a little bit about why I actually think those stories are wildly important, but a little bit later down in the roadmap. So the biggest piece of advice I give to CS folks who are trying to figure out how to make a better relationship with their product team and be more involved in the development of their product is, you've got to be data-driven. I know that sounds so straightforward, but it is hard to do. And when I say you got to be data-driven, you have to have a system for collecting the feedback. And it needs to be intentional. It should be collected in real time. So don't wait until product shows up and says like, hey, what are the customers thinking? And then you're trying to remember the last, 6 things that got said to you and write them down. You should be collecting it as it happens. And as you collect it, you should really be thinking about how you tie it to impact. Why does this matter? If we did this thing, what change is going to happen? What business metric is going to move? What customer metric is going to move? Because that's really how, as a CS team, you're going to move the hearts of a product team, is by showing up with data that anchors your stories. And I also think that's really important for CX to make sure they're actually recommending the most important things. This is something that sales does too, where if you're not taking the time to track this data, odds are you're going to show up and talk about the most recent things that happened to you or the most horrible things that just happened to you. It's not going to be representative of actually all of your customers. So in that scenario, you're really giving voice to things that you maybe shouldn't be giving a voice to. So you as a CS team want to have the data to say, no, we know that these are the most important things for customers. So you need to have a way to collect it, and it needs to be accessible to everyone. All of CS needs to be able to get to it. All of product needs to get to it.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of opinions about exactly where and how you capture that data. If you're capturing it, 2 thumbs up from me kind of thing. Like the devil can be in the details there, but you need to make sure that it's a all hands on deck thing and that it is tied to impact.
And I guess the size of the opportunity pie in this case, right?
100%. Yeah. It's oversimplifying it, but if you come and say, hey, we're going to lose a bunch of these customers who are not in our ICP if we don't do this thing, versus we're going to lose these customers who all perfectly match our ICP and have these expansion opportunities on them and that sort of thing. Like, that's a no-brainer decision for the product team. But imagine presenting those 2 ideas with none of the context.
Right.
Now we're in a 50-50 shot. Now we're going like, well, is one easier to do versus the other? We're missing really important context that really CX is the owner of. CX should be the owner of customer insights at your organization and responsible for democratizing those across the organization. And that includes feedback.
Right. Really, really interesting stuff in there. Just want to get actually one more side into that. And if you look at it from the CS lens itself, I am a single CS person. How do I then advocate for that customer that's told me a great story or threatened to leave? So are you back to data, or what else would you recommend those people?
Yeah. So if you're tracking these things as you go, I'd say, don't skimp on writing down the details while they're fresh in your mind. You know, all of us like to believe that our memories are going to be better than they are, but like taking an extra 3 minutes when it happens, you'll be really happy with past you when future you is asked to, give more context on these things. But track the data and give those, write it down when it happens with those details, because where I think those anecdotes and those stories are really important is once you've decided based on data to approach something, as you're designing that solution, that's where the stories become so, so important. And I think of this like, you really want to balance the quantitative and qualitative. To use a possibly strained metaphor here, let's say you're going to do a day trip in a city that you're not super familiar with. So, and you have a friend that lives in that city. Your quantitative data is going to be your GPS. It's going to give you clear directions on where to go, the places that you want to go, how to get there fastest. It's going to tell you about tolls, all that sort of stuff. But your qualitative data is your friend in the car with you, who's going to point out cool things along the way, suggest detours, that are going to show you something that you might not have known was there. And so if you only follow the GPS, your trip isn't as complete. You maybe missed out on some really great textured opportunities. If you only followed your friend, maybe you don't do the important things you wanted to do during the one day you were in this city. And it's the same to me with the quantitative versus qualitative data. So I think it's really important for CS to be interwoven in the development of a product solution, because that's where those stories become valuable. That's when we say, okay, when we're thinking about these settings or what the experience is, the stories there help you make the right decisions as a product team, because now you're looking for that texture and that context that are ever so important that come in the stories. So this is not me saying that the stories don't matter. You just want to deploy your stories at the right time in the process. And that is that's when the data has proven that you should be doing the thing that you're doing.
Right. And then it's why we're doing this and what does it actually matter for the customer. Yeah, great.
Exactly.
Shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, you mentioned at the very, very start, needs to be a good marriage between a great product and a great quality customer success and the support side of things. But when it comes to product adoption, what role would you contribute to each of these teams, the CS or the product managers or the product marketing, if you have that team? Where would you put that objective to?
Yeah, it may sound like a bit of a cop-out, but it is owned by everyone. Now, the challenge of things being owned by everyone is that it's owned by no one. So that's where things get a little mushy. So and this is where I come back to the shared objectives, shared data, and shared metrics, because I'm just going to say, let's say we've decided that we need to increase adoption on feature A. Okay, how are we going to measure that? What specific increase are we looking for? Now, how CS tries to influence that number might be different than how product marketing and product management decide to influence that number. But if we're all looking at the same number and we all have the same goal in mind, then that's what ties us back together. It's not like there's only one thing you could do to move that number and you have to decide which of the teams is going to do it. No, you probably want a multi-pronged approach, because just sending CS in to talk about how great the feature is and try to teach people might not be enough. Some people might need warming and education from product marketing, and then they might need in-app guidance from product. All of these things come together then to move the number. So if we're centralized around the result, what specifically it is and how we're going to define it, then we can deploy these different teams in multiple ways to solve the same problem.
Yeah. Seeing it as starting with the objective in mind and then putting sort of key results onto it, like a typical OKR way of
Exactly.
Right?
And that makes sure that it is still shared because everybody has the same O, but the KRs then come down to the specific tactics that each team are best equipped to own. And I think that's best is potentially vague, but I think that's what you want to think about. What are the tactics we'd want to take to move this number, and which team is best equipped to deploy that tactic based on the resources that they have, the knowledge that they have, the availability they have, all those things. Then you can then it becomes a project plan, if you will, and you sort of assign out the pieces and parts.
Nice. Just a side note here, if anyone has questions for Abby, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll get to them in just a minute. Before we wrap up, a couple of other things. Now that you've worked on the both sides of the coin, what would you say is the biggest learning from working in CS, and what's your biggest learning in working in product?
So my biggest learning from both is the same, and that is that being strong or being cognizant of the opposite makes you better at your role. So I was strongest as a CSM when I knew my product well and I felt well anchored in why it did what it did and the vision of it. I have been the best versions of myself as a product person when I'm really anchored in customer work and I engage with customers directly a lot. It can feel weird to wander into what feels like not your territory. But if you figure out how to actually be aligned and allied as teams, then it doesn't feel like you're wandering into someone else's territory. Because in my experience, I am better at both roles when I have insight and intent from the opposite role. So that is something I encourage a lot of teams to think about, because we can get so narrowly focused on our day-to-day that we forget to pick up our chin and look around it, at larger things that could have a bigger outsized influence on what we're doing. And I know I'm talking to mostly CS people today, but I will say to CS people, if your product team is not involved with your customers, that's not correct. There are a lot of product teams out there that are completely behind the scenes product teams. And I don't believe in that as a product person. So I guess I'm saying I would grant you all the right to go and talk to your product leader about the product team being more visible with your customers, because you'll be really amazed by what it can do for your CS team and also for your customers when product is out there in the mix, really pushing that feeling of, working on a solution that's meant for your customers. There's a lot that can be uncovered there.
And vice versa, how would you get CS people who have never really talked to product before go and talk to them first?
Yeah. So I'd say remember that. How do I say this? Remember to be thoughtful about, if you're going to give an anecdote, how you give it. I've told this story before, but early on in my product career, I remember a CSM running up to me in the hallway, and this person's hair was just on fire. And they told me this very dramatic story, very fast. Their hands are all over everywhere, about I just got off this call and they yelled at me for this and they're not going to renew for that. We're all human. I'm sitting there, I'm there might be useful information in this story, but it's coming at me hot. It's coming at me certainly with a lot of hyperbolics involved. It's even bordering on rude because you didn't calm down before you came into the situation. So I'd say to CS, think about putting your best foot forward when you communicate with product, and acknowledge that stories are important, but not your lead. You want to lead with data because you want them to make data-driven decisions. Whether we believe it, whether it feels good in the moment or not, we don't want them to chase the last random thing that a customer said to us. That's not good product development. That's not a product that's really going to grow and mature. That's a product that's going to become a Frankenstein. So remember that, and really think, when you have opportunities to engage with product, how can you try to speak in their language?
Nice one. Good. Lightning round first before we are actually at the hour. What would you want to leave the audience with? What's your top calls to action?
Yeah, so I would say first, if you are here and you are someone who is a leader or who has influence in your organization, whether it's on the CS side, as I assume most of you are, or potentially on the product side, take that role seriously. Especially if a relationship doesn't really exist between these two teams, your organization, you are a great person to get that started because you have a lot of power to set examples and start somewhere. And when I say start somewhere, I'm going to say come back to those shared objectives, shared metrics, shared data. If you don't anchor on those things, anything else you do isn't going to materialize in a real meaningful way. It's going to feel like random things you're trying to do to work together if you don't have those anchors there. And then last but not least, I'd say on a day-to-day basis, and this is probably a good reminder for us as humans in general, assume positive intent. It can be hard in some charged situations on both sides of the house when you need to work through a challenging situation. It can be easy to get our heckles up or, to become defensive, both sides of the house. So something I say to my team and our CS team all the time is let's assume positive intent. Let's assume we're all here to solve the same problem. And let's start from there. Doesn't mean we can't be animated about our discussions, but let's assume positive intent and start from there. It brings the energy down a little bit and allows a lot more conversations to sort of happen productively.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Great. We've just got one more maybe clarifying question from Elisa. Thank you. As a CSM in a SaaS company, what would you suggest as relevant data to collect for the product team?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So when I talk about impact, the first thing that's going to come to mind is potential impacted revenue. And also maybe a sense of how at risk that revenue is. So let's just have a scenario where a customer's worth $10,000 comes to you and says, hey, I've got, I really wish the product did X. Noting that down. So let's think about that simple sentence I said right there. Yes, they're worth $10,000, but they said, I really wish it did X. So if we think about, yes, that's $10,000, but like on their priority scale, on the customer's own self-reported priority scale, sounds like it's a nice to have or a lower priority versus a $10,000 customer coming and saying, I am putting in notice if this doesn't happen or if I can't do this. Now, again, we've got that number, but we understand the potential impact to the business. So think about not only the revenue number, but the scale on which it lives. And don't just think about lost revenue. Sometimes in CS, I think we over-focus on risk mitigation. We're just putting out fires everywhere that's there. Let's remember that when we have successful customers, it is our right and our opportunity to grow with them. So I also really love it when I'll get suggestions and feedback that say, hey, this isn't an at-risk customer, but if we had this thing, there's potential revenue here. There's growth revenue here. So so I'd really think about potential revenue either to keep or to expand and then put it on some level of scale. Not everything can be priority one. If everything's priority one, nothing is priority one. So think about that as a CSM, as you take in these things from your customers, you need to be a good filter on what is truly priority versus not.
I think that's very, very eloquently put in terms of urgency and priority. So that's great. Thank you for other comments. I don't see any other questions, and I know we're just running slightly over time, but I just wanted to thank you a really, really, really big thank you to Appy for joining us on the webinar and giving us so many nuggets of golden information on how to get this relationship into a better state. Feel free to obviously LinkedIn with you, Abby.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Anytime you want to hit her with more product questions. But thank you everyone for taking the time or listening on demand. And we'll be back in October again. Thanks everyone and have a great rest of your day. Bye.